be seated. By his stripes we are healed. You may be familiar with the Apostle Peter writing the same thing, first letter, second chapter. By his stripes we are healed. Of course, he was quoting and referring to this passage in Isaiah. Peter saw it all happen. Isaiah did not. Isaiah wrote these words 600 years before Jesus lived. God told him what his son would be like, what he would go through, how he would be rejected, how he would be treated. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Isaiah wrote that Jesus is despised. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. It sounds very sad. Have you ever been despised or rejected? That's no fun. When people look at you wrong or stay away from you, say things about you, you feel bad. Jesus bore this cross of pain for us. Emotional pain, physical pain, he bore it for us. Now we ask the question that our sermon title or our series title is asked, must Jesus bear the cross alone? And as we probably mentioned last week, let me rephrase it, must Jesus bear this cross alone? This cross of pain for our healing, the stripes that heal us, must he go through that alone? Yes. Theologically, we believe that only Jesus could give his life for our salvation and for our healing. We believe, because we're taught by the Word, Paul tells us Jesus, he was eligible, he was sinless, he was pure. He gave himself as a sin offering, though he knew no sin. He was the only person who could make the sacrifice. We know this, we believe it. It seems a little unusual to other religions, but it's the only way to be saved and forgiven. What we'll pick up and learn in this passage is that his salvation, his death on the cross, had at least two purposes. His blood, and we'll sing about that toward the end of the service, his blood was poured out for the forgiveness of sins, for salvation. There's no remission of sin without the shedding of blood. But this passage refers to his body. He was wounded and bruised. The stripes were the whip marks on his back and front, on his body. His body was given so that we could be healed, physically healed. He's the only one who could bear this cross. That's true. However, there will be crosses of pain for us also. And you know this. You know this world is not free from struggle, pain, conflict, hurt, grief. Some will face painful sicknesses in the body. 2 or 3 in our church may be experiencing that pain right now. Some will face painful rejection in relationships or even employments. Some will face the pain of failure. It's okay to fail even if we're obeying God. He'll help. Some will face the pain of sadness of losing a loved one. Some will face the pain of separation, as work may call us to a different place. We're separate from our family and friends. That's painful, but necessary. God's work. These crosses that we bear, they help us come close to Jesus. Raise your hand if you can carry your cross alone. And the pulpit's yours because you're a greater person than me. I can't carry mine alone. You can't carry yours alone. It brings us to Jesus for help. Last Sunday night, Sherry Coffey, I'll mention her again in a moment, radically said she prays to have things happen in her life that keeps her going to Jesus? Even, Lord, bring me something hard, bring me a problem, bring me a trouble so I'll stay close to you. I said, Sherry, I'm not there yet. I got enough challenges. I don't need to pray for more. And you probably have enough now too. But the challenges keep us right tight with the Lord. These crosses help to allow Jesus to show us what he can do. We would never know the difference if we never experienced these things. And these crosses we bear, crosses of pain, allow Jesus even to be honored by us in our trouble. And that's a strong testimony. A strong testimony. Now, these crosses that we bear of these different kinds, Jesus knows all about them. In Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15, the writer of Hebrews says, "This high priest," referring to Jesus, "of ours understands our weaknesses. For he faced all of the same testings we do, yet he did not sin." He faced hunger. He faced grief. He faced cold. He faced hot. He faced rejection. He faced everything we have. He understands. So must Jesus bear the cross of pain alone? No. We will bear these too. There's a cross for everyone, and there's a cross for me. Let me zero in on this Isaiah passage, chapter 53, verse 4, and read that again. "Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows." Can you picture that? If he's carrying the cross, he is bearing our griefs and sorrows. Now, to properly understand the text, you've got to dig into it, its context, even its original languages, its intent. What did Isaiah intend to tell us? What did God intend to tell us through this prophecy? If he said that Jesus would bear our griefs, what kind of griefs is a good Bible study question. What do you mean by grief, God? Do you mean the grief of loss of loved one? The grief of loss of battle? The grief of loss of money? The grief of loss of possessions? What grief are you talking about? So the best thing to do is go back to the original language. What is that word that Isaiah actually used when he wrote it? And there are study tools that can help us do that. In seminary, we studied Greek, but we weren't required to study Hebrew. So I've found the Hebrew word. It is the word holy. And that word is translated sickness, disease, grief. But the number of times it's translated grief makes a difference. It's only translated grief twice. It's translated as sickness 21 times. So what does that say to us? It says to us this passage really means surely he has borne our sickness. Sicknesses can grieve us. That's a fact. But that's more specifically what Isaiah is talking about. Jesus is actually carrying our sickness. So the first point in the message, the cross of pain, Jesus is carrying the pain of sickness. And we know there's a lot of sickness. There was then, there is now, there will be until Jesus remakes the world. What do you think is the worst sickness, either today or in the New Testament? What was the dreaded disease in the New Testament? Leprosy. A terrible disease. Thankfully, we don't know it. We don't see it. Other countries may, but we don't. Leprosy was the rotting of the flesh, which felt terrible and smelled terrible and was very contagious. As you know, you couldn't stay in your community. You couldn't stay in your home. You had to go to a leper colony. In Matthew's Gospel, as we read it through this part of the season of Lent, the birth, the baptism, the temptations, the teachings, and the Sermon on the Mount, what was the first miracle that Matthew reported? The first miracle was the healing of a leper. The man saw Jesus, knew who Jesus was, had faith in Jesus, and desperately needed healing. The man comes to Jesus and says, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. He's begging him, Lord, if you're willing. But it's up to Jesus. The leper can't do it. The doctors couldn't do it. He was trusting Jesus. Jesus could see the longing in the man's eyes. He could see the pain. He understood the pain and the weirdness of having to be away from everybody. The man even coming close to Jesus. And then when Wes added the insight that Jesus touched him, he touched me and made me whole. Wow, Jesus, you are amazing. He had power over sickness and power over that isolation. And when he touched the man was healed. His limbs were restored in fingers and toes. And then Jesus says, go show yourself to the priest. Why? Because the law required if you had a sickness and you were well, you had to be declared clean by the priest. You just couldn't do it yourself. You have to be declared clean so that you can come back to the community and so that you can go into the temple to worship. So Jesus told him, go and show yourself to the priest. And then he added, tell no one else. Just go show yourself to the priest as a testimony to him. That testimony is, the priest would ask, how were you healed? Jesus of Nazareth healed me. Testimony to the very priests that were going to reject and despise the Son of God. Jesus was willing. The pain of sickness, he carried it. The second miracle in Matthew 8. This miracle was for a Jew. The second miracle was for a Gentile, a Roman centurion. Now, Bob Rice, I try to pick on the biggest and tallest, and you and Dan Tees stand up. I want to see who's taller. And then I want you to have an arm wrestling match. I want to see who's stronger. But either of these guys would be Roman centurions. Big, tough guys. Me and Bob Land, we're just soldiers, we just follow. And Mr. Junius, we just follow. But a Roman centurion is a tough man. And he comes to Jesus, a not good-looking at all Nazarene. So my servant, he says in verse 6, my servant is home, lying at home, paralyzed, dreadfully tormented. The pain of sickness was all over this centurion's servant. And the centurion could have said, carry him out and bring me another servant, but he didn't. Centurions aren't stupid. Men will follow you if you are a good leader. If you care for your men, they'll follow you. If you care for the women, they'll follow you. They'll want to because you care for them. This centurion risked coming to a Jew, a Roman, coming to a Jew for help. He crossed that social barrier. He crossed that spiritual barrier. We don't know if the centurion believed or not. He didn't care. He wanted his servant to be healed. He comes to Jesus. Now, Jesus is approached by a Gentile. He wasn't sent to the Gentiles. What did he say to the Roman centurion? I'll come and heal him. No problem. I will come and heal him. Jesus didn't even hesitate that the Gentile had his own house. The servant was in the house. Jesus would have to go in the house. No Jew went into a Gentile's house. It's against the law. Jesus was going to do it. But the Roman centurion was so aware of authority and Jewish custom, he said, you don't even have to come under my roof. Just say the word. It'll be done. Jesus said, that's faith. Haven't found such faith in all of Israel. So Jesus said the word. At that moment, the servant was healed. The pain of sickness, the torment was gone. Healed. These miracles can happen because Jesus took our sicknesses on himself at the cross, on his body, in his body. The chastisement for our peace was put on him. The punishment was put on him in his body for our bodies to be healed. I'm learning with you. Why did Jesus' death require such destruction of the body? Unfortunately, Mel Gibson did such a great job with the Passion of the Christ. He really showed it's so hard to even watch our Lord whipped and scourged in that movie. Front and back, and his flesh torn. By the time he carried the cross, he couldn't hardly even carry it. He fell, and someone else had to help him. Nails in his hands and feet, bleeding to death. His body was ragged, destroyed. Why? God, why did you have your son put to death like that? He could have been executed in much quicker means. Beheaded, the crucifixion was the slowest, most agonizing way to die. I think God is showing us how much he bore in his body for our healing. For by his stripes, we are healed. The second point, the pain of sorrow. Isaiah talked about he bore our griefs and he carried our sorrows. So let's look up the word sorrow. Does it mean, what kind of sorrow? The sorrow because the blue team lost? Or the sorrow because the red team lost? Or the sorrow because we lost? Or what kind of sorrow? The sorrow because we really are sad? Because people have been murdered in high schools? What kind of sorrow? And the Hebrew word there is the word makaf, which was used 4 times in the Old Testament. But guess what word was used more than that in the English? The word pain. This word is more often translated pain. 11 times it's translated pain. Physical pain and mental pain. We talked about some of Jesus' physical pain, but we didn't mention the thorns, the cross, the crown of thorns. We've got thorns in Adair County. They're that long. That's probably what those guys used, a crown of thorns, and they didn't care. They mashed it on his head, stuck his head. That hurts. The Romans didn't care. Pain. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our pain. Surely he has borne our sicknesses and carried our pain. If I was going to translate it, that's what I would translate it. Physical pain that most of us will never understand. There are some things very painful in this life. Then Jesus experienced mental pain, just as the word covers. Mental pain, the grief over losing his cousin John. If you read the account when they came and said, your cousin is dead. What happened? Jesus withdrew. He wanted to go be by himself. And we all know what he wanted to go do. He wanted to go talk to the Father and cry. Because his ministry teammate, his partner, was dead. But the crowds came up and Jesus had to minister to the crowds. Grief. Mental pain. How about disappointment? Disappointment of what could have been. What could have happened in Jerusalem if they'd believed in him. Matthew 23:37, Matthew writes, quoting Jesus, Jesus said, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." To the leper, Jesus says, "I'm willing." But the Jews to Jesus said, "We are not willing. We are not willing to believe that you are the Messiah and to follow you." It grieved him. And then lastly, the anger Out of Matthew 11, Jesus was angry with Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum. Angry with them because he did these healing works in those cities. And they should have been repenting and following him as his disciples. They didn't. He said it'll be easier for Tyre and Sidon than for you. Jesus was bearing the cross of pain, the pain of sorrow. You know, when you try to show people you love them and they throw it back in your face, that's hard. On the cross, Jesus is trying to show us he loves us. He's dying for us. He's paying our price for our sin. He is earning the right to heal our bodies. And people mock him. He was despised and rejected. Billy Graham put it this way, and I believe in one of those sermons that I've seen on TV, I've heard him say this very thing. God proved his love on the cross. When Christ hung and bled and died, it was God saying to the world, I love you. I can hear Dr. Graham saying that, can't you? Well, we have come to believe in Jesus, and many, many, many have come to believe in him, and we know what he did and why he did it. The third pain I want to bring out this morning is the pain of separation. The pain of separation. Janet, I see you back there behind Jim. Actually, I can't see you behind there. Jim is the third centurion in the room. Now I can see Janet. You take those two grandbabies away from her when they're going through that phase of separation anxiety. Wah! You're going to hear a big old fuss. They're not going to want to be separate from you. I'll just come and get one from you and I'll demonstrate. They don't know me. Like, you're crying. Jenna said it might be her crying for separation from the babies. Well, I receive that. I understand. We don't like to be separate from those we love. We love to be with them. Jesus, the first separation he went through was to come down from heaven to earth. We haven't been to heaven, so we don't get it. But coming from heaven to earth is a real downgrade. We don't have near the services here that are up there. So Jesus took a physical body, one of these ancient physical things, and got into one compared to a spiritual body. And then on the cross, what psalm did he quote on the cross? Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? That was our call to worship. Jesus is saying, Father, I feel abandoned by you. I feel separate from you. Because sin was on him. And our sicknesses were on him. And God can't come near that which isn't holy. For the first time ever, Jesus was actually separated from his Father. But the Psalm 22, is not a psalm of unbelief or a psalm of desperation. It's a psalm declaring that God will deliver his people. And Jesus declaring that God will deliver him. But he felt separate. Separate. So in summary, Jesus, he bore our sicknesses. He bore our sorrows. And he bears our separation. All in his body. Must Jesus bear the cross alone? No, not this one. We will bear some of these very same things ourselves. Sicknesses and sorrows and separation. It's part of being a Christian. It's the hard part of being a Christian. It's the part of the gospel that really separates the true believers from the false believers. It's the reason Paul was so frustrated with the church in Corinth. Come on, you Corinthians, you're enjoying the milk of God's love, but where's the meat of suffering for God? Grow up. Face the hard things. Take the name of Jesus into the public square. Be a Christian. Jesus himself said in Matthew 10:38, he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. James told us that we'd face trials of many kinds and to be joyful when we face those trials because it's a test of our faith. Do we really believe that God has us and He will protect us and He will provide for us or not? And there's no theoretical way to test that. You have to test it with real life. Then it's a real test. And I'm preaching to the choir. You all have faced trials and come through things, and some are experiencing things right now. Right now. I know, Robin, you've got pain in your body. Roberta, you've got pain in your body. Simpson, you've got pain in your leg. I know that. Right now. But you're here to worship God. Well done. Well done. Jesus was serious about us. And Jesus, we want to be serious about you, following you, making you known. And as we are, as we take our cross and face these painful things, whether He heals us instantly or He takes His time to heal us or He doesn't heal us, doesn't matter. We want to follow after His plan for us because that's how He's glorified. And there's good news. There's good news. This pain of sickness, it can be traded for the joy of healing. The joy of healing. You know, by His stripes we are healed. We should look up those words. What kind of healing are you talking about, Isaiah? What word did he use? He used the Hebrew word rapha, which means healing. Physical, national, individual healing. It means physical healing. It is in the breadth of that definition. By Jesus' physical stripes in His body, we can be bodily healed. Good news. Secondly, we can trade the pain of our sorrows for the joy of help. Help. Some sorrows turn right around and some don't, but we need help. We need help. I'll tell you a little story. We've been talking about the storm. I'd asked Bob and Sandy if Greene County got any rain last night. They just got a little shower. Kate and I got an indulge in Flatwoods. We were soaked. No, I'm only kidding. Greene County about floated away too. Bob went to bed at 3 in the morning, finally shaking from, okay, the tornadoes are over. I can go to bed now. Well, Cynthia, I was in your RV, and the wind blew, and I'm in the RV. Karen's in the cabin because I like to get up late at night or early in the morning and type, and that's not good for her sleep. So I had a funeral message to prepare for David Perigin, and I was exhausted last night, so I got a little nap. Well, the wind woke me up at 11. And there was no trees anywhere around. The RV was perfectly safe. But it rocks. You ever been there? Ben, you ever been in your RV when it rocks? Whoa! Hold on, the cabin didn't rock, but I am in the RV. I could handle that because I knew it wouldn't tip over. If it did, I'll just hold on. I'll be all right. We'll fix it, all right? Then the power went out. That little beeping sound, Cynthia, when the power goes out, I'm like, oh no. Which I have an extension cord run from my temporary power to the RV. It's pouring rain. I have to go out and reset the breaker. How fun. 11 o'clock at night in the pouring rain and the wind. So I wait 10 minutes for it to calm down a little bit. I put on my poncho. Out I go. I go over to the pole. Breaker looks okay. So flick it. I look at the meter. It's blank. The power's out all over Flatwoods. Kate didn't have power either. I'm like, well, good. At least it's not my cords. So no power. And this is just a little joy of help. So, perfect. I'm wide awake, Bob. I didn't know there was tornado warnings. I'm glad I didn't know it. So I wasn't afraid. I just opened my computer, which had a battery, and I prepared David Perigin's funeral. It was either going to be early this morning or late last night. So there I worked for an hour and a half. Perfect. My battery's going down. My only light is my flashlight and my phone, which I rely on the internet for the phone also, so it's draining the phone. So the two battery things I have are draining. 12% phone. Battery warning comes on the computer. I better shut them down. So I shut them down. That means I have no light. Cynthia, I didn't have a candle. I didn't have a match. And you know I took your battery loose because it drains the battery. I couldn't start the RV. I am in complete darkness. First time in my life. I don't have a light. I'm like, I don't like this. I can't see. It got a little spooky. So I just kind of curled up in the chair and said, okay, Lord, the sun will rise in 6 hours from now. Sure enough, the sun came up And I got out. First thing I do, Cynthia, was go look at the meter. Oh, it's got numbers. We have power. Yay. Karen says there's no power, no coffee. And I said, there's power. Get up. So she made fresh coffee. She hopped out of bed and ground that coffee. We got help. I'm thankful for those guys who go out in the rain and fix the wires. I don't know where it was, but Kate and I were both happy that we had power. That seems like a small story to you, but to me it was a big event. I was up till 1, 2 in the morning. Bob and I hope we can get a nap this afternoon later, because tonight when Gracie comes back, she's going to be speaking about miracles and summer healing. Last Sunday night was a testimony about the restoration of life. Also, next 2 weeks from tonight, Sherry Coffey's coming back, and I've asked her to come minister for prayers for whatever kinds of sorrows or sicknesses for healing. She hasn't done that before, but she had us so open. I think it'd be very good to ask her to pray for anybody that had any kind of need in the evening service. These are things in the evening. So Gracie, you're on a ramp. Sherry, I'm not sure what next Sunday is. Then Sherry's coming back on the 11th. Next Sunday I'll probably preach about healing. And then we'll have a healing service in the evening. The joy of help. The joy of help. You all have been helped. God's helped. Betty took a bunch of food in my car Wednesday night. Thank you. Betty, you were the main cook, or Cynthia was the main cook on that? I thought so. So she's blessed me twice. Food and shelter. Cynthia, thank you. Next thing is clothing. Can we go shopping? I'm only fun. Joy of help. I close with this story, the joy of home. The opposite of separation is coming home. Billy Graham went home to the big home. We like to come home to our regular home. And Karen and I, we like to come back to the cabin in the RV. We just like to come back to our place. And the home is coming along well. But being at home, I hope you feel at home here. This is God's living room and dining room. I hope we feel at home here. Father, you help us to feel at home. And Kate, I got to tell the story you told me building. She comes and helps us build Friday. And I said, this is perfect. Raise your hand, you ever heard the name Jim Baker? Raise your hand, you ever heard the word tax fraud? Okay. Ever heard the word sex scandal? Jim Baker, Jim. 45 years worth of tax fraud. Prison sentence. And yes, he was an embarrassment to the kingdom, embarrassment to himself, to us as Christians. Yes, he knew all that. He was in the prison in his orange prison suit cleaning toilets. And Kate actually found this documented. Him telling it. Jim Baker told this last week. Billy Graham had passed away. He told this story. Jim was feeling pretty low. And you would, if you were separated from your friends and family. You had nothing. You had embarrassed yourself. You had embarrassed your Lord. You had no integrity. Cleaning toilets. Well, he had a visitor. The guard said to him, Jim, you got a visitor. I don't want any visitors. He was very depressed, even considering suicide. I don't want any visitors. The guard said, you probably want to come and see this person, this visitor. Come on. So Jim left his bucket and his cleaning rags and came out to the visitation room, an open room. And sure enough, don't you know who was there? It was Dr. Billy Graham and his wife Ruth. Went to see Jim Baker. And it's told that Dr. Graham went up to Jim and gave him a big hug. You're not separated, Jim. Yeah, you sinned, but you're not separated. And then, Kate, I learned that Dr. Graham said to him, Jim, I love you. What can separate us from the love of Christ? Neither height nor depth, nor angels nor demons. Nothing can separate us from the love of Christ. That's the good news. The joy of home. Wow. The three sharps are going to come and sing a song we all know well, Just As I Am. This song is for you, an invitation to come if there's a need for prayer. Maybe there's a pain of sickness or pain of sorrow or pain of separation. Billy Graham used this song to invite people to come to Jesus for salvation. You're invited to come to Jesus